Well, like, so I just want to show something that's relatively brief, and it pertains to the two wee clips that I posted on my channel yesterday, or it was either that or the early hours of this morning, um, in relation to a presentation about anti-racism, because I've often said in the past, and for those that have followed my channel for a while, you've probably heard me having these conversations with other people on streams and whatnot, as well as being somewhat vocal myself from time to time. I've often questioned why it is that there seems to be a bit of a deafening silence when it comes to parents in general speaking out about building racial literacy and the BS bogus term that they hide behind, aka anti-racism. And at times I've given people maybe the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just hear the term anti-racism and they just presume that that just simply means that their children are being taught not to be racist, which on the face of it, you kind of come across as a bit of an arsehole if you're trying to say that was a bad thing, especially when we're talking about kids. But my point is obviously that building racial literacy is critical race theory, and all the people that are involved in this project are critical race theorists, you know. But there's a glaring contradiction that I did notice while I was recording those clips, but it's too tired to fucking record at the time, so I'm just going to do it briefly this morning. So, just to begin though, I'm going to let the woman introduce herself at the start, so you can see where she originates from in terms of, building racial literacy, you know. So, I'll share the screen now quickly. Okay.
Okay, so about 2 years ago now, I undertook training with Education Scotland on a training course called Building Racial Literacy, and it's quite a big course now across Scotland, and it's for teachers and practitioners from universities, from unions, from schools, and it's in how to engage with anti-racist literature and how to bring that into our classrooms and engage our learners in anti-racism as well. And this slide I have stolen from that course, and I think it's a really important slide, and it's important anytime I think that we're discussing racism or anti-racism with a group of people, and it's about creating safer, braver spaces. And basically what it means is throughout this session that I'm going to have with you, I do understand that it might it might cause some negative emotions from some people, because we might talk about some things that might make people feel uncomfortable. So there might be a bit of discomfort. And so if that happens, it's okay to remove yourself for a wee while, shove the volume off for a wee bit, go away and get a cup.
Right, so you get the point. So she's from the Building Racial Literacy Programme, which is obviously Scottish Government funded, and it's basically introducing teachers from all stripes, whether that be early learning all the way to like university or college professors, etc. Basically to sort of change their worldview in many respects, because it's all about seeing racism in a different light. So we can disregard at the door the definition of racism that you would find in the dictionary, and it's all about critical race theory, systemic oppression and whatnot. However, just briefly for anybody that's not aware, I'll share this tab very quickly. Building racial literacy on Education Scotland's website. And they say here that the Building Racial Literacy Programme promotes anti-racism as a baseline professional value, empowering educators to identify and implement anti-racist behaviours and processes in their everyday life. And their long-term goal, and this is the part that, the long-term goal of the programme is to make every educator in Scotland racially literate, effective at dealing with racism, which they have incidentally redefined, and then some. There's multiple different versions of racism, which you wouldn't know unless you start participating in the programme. And to be confident in leading anti-racism. And this is where the term comes from. Quite often you'll hear, it's not enough to be against racism anymore. No, you have to actively be anti-racist. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, and then very briefly as well, before I show you the contradiction in this clip, this tab here, this is the safer, braver spaces that woman was referring to. And Jesus, I mean, God, this stuff just pisses me off. But conversations about race can be emotional, and people will, people feel how people feel will vary from person to person. What's mildly comfortable for one person could be very distressing for another. For Black people and people of color, this distress is known as racial trauma, and you can't get racial trauma unless you're white. If you're not white, sorry. Yeah. So right out of the jump, you know. So they've excluded whitey from that as well. This bogus term of racial trauma that they speak of is just another one of their made-up fantasies in the never-ending Tinder box. That is all their made-up bullshit. But regardless, so whitey can't experience racial trauma. And then they say that conversations we have will inevitably feel uncomfortable at times. But don't feel put off by this, particularly if you're from a white majority ethnic background. Learning is more effective when we step outside. So, yeah, now the white majority ethnic background guy or girl, they could be uncomfortable, but that's not racial trauma, you say. Of course not. Anyway, so to get to the contradiction, and it's, as I say, it's not exactly like a mega hot take for myself, but my point is, as I said at the start, I can't help but feel that perhaps maybe some people, and I'm talking about not people like watch my stuff or whatever, but like parents and whatnot, and this goes for kids as well. Very easy to see when I play these two clips side by side, just how devious and manipulative they are, you know? And I think you could probably forgive parents for sort of falling for it to a certain extent, but it's incumbent on them to look further into it, you know? But so I will share this. So there's a section towards the end where a wee boy, and he only has a couple of lines. It's about here. So I'll mute this for a second until he comes on the screen, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So should be coming up. I don't want to skip too far ahead. Right there. Leave it at that. Okay, here he comes. So let's listen to what he says, and then I'm going to play a clip from earlier on in the same presentation. Okay, I'm just going to mute my mic so it doesn't echo.
Of a boy that attended, just a wee short one.
It's important to talk about racism because you're not born with racism, you're taught it. So if we all learn that it's a bad thing and it's wrong, our future generations are going to know not to do it, and it's not going to exist in the future. So if history doesn't want to repeat itself, we should try and eliminate the bad.
Okay, I just thought that was a nice wee, thing that boy had said, and I thought it was quite powerful what it said. So he came along to Party 22, and I think it was a reflection of the day that the children and the young people that came along, they are looking for change, they are pushing for change, they want it to happen, and so I think we have to keep doing all of these things that we're doing to meet their needs, to meet the need that they have for change to happen. And so if we look on to the next slide, then we can.
How convenient. But regardless, so the wee boy there says that if we want to eradicate racism, we're not born with racism, and we're not born with inherent racism, or words to that effect. And if we want to eradicate in the future, then we must learn it's wrong and whatnot. Okay? We're not born with racism. We learn racism. Racism is learned. Okay? So this is what kids are taught. Okay? This child here is a product of the very people who have set up these anti-racist school clubs in Glasgow. This child is regurgitating what he's learned in school. And before anybody jumps the gun and thinks that I'm talking bollocks here or words to that effect, bear in mind what he's saying on the face of it, you can't really disagree with, given the fact he's only a child. Okay? I'm not about to sit here and chastise a wee boy for saying that if we want to eradicate racism, then we should be getting taught that it's bad. Okay? But this is the problem here. The fundamental problem that ties directly into the contradiction that I'll play in just a second. Okay? Because first and foremost, when we're speaking about these people who set up this program, the Building Racial Literacy program, and subsequently all the anti-racist school clubs, etc., and all of the different initiatives that Glasgow Council have ingratiated themselves in, which this long arse video goes into detail about to a certain extent, they've redefined racism. There's multiple different variations of racism now. In fact, just on that, to prove that point ever so slightly without having to come off the tab, just here on one of the last slides when they're talking about resources and stuff that they're doing with teachers, because this woman is obviously some sort of anti-racist trainer now. Look at the top right one. In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. So we live in a racist society, apparently. Yeah? Because what's that referring to? Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, you've all heard it. Bullshit about, systemic oppression, institutional racism, right? And then you start hearing more and more of these words coming from these people about microaggressions and whatnot. So when a wee boy naively says that in order to tackle racism and prevent it from rearing its ugly head in the future, we need to learn about it. What exactly are they fucking learning? They're being introduced to they're being introduced to critical race theory, but it's the same way that they're doing it by calling it anti-racism. They're disguising the introduction of critical race theory. I would argue it's subversion. They're disguising their subversion by pretending they're simply trying to promote tolerance and push back against the dictionary definition of racism. Anyway, to the contradiction though. So bear in mind that boy said that we're not born with racism. It's learned. So we need to learn about it to know that it's bad, etc. Okay, now let me get to this bit here. I should have really have taken a note of the section timestamp, but it's here anyway. Okay. Let me get that. Let me see. So I'll let this play out.
Schools or whatever, and we speak to certain members of staff, one of the first things that they'll say to us is I'm not racist because I don't see colour. Colour doesn't matter to me. But actually, if you look at the anti-racist journey as a white person, then if you look right down at the bottom at number 1, that is the bottom of the journey. That's the starting point of the journey, not seeing colour. And so again, it can be such a climb for some people to realise that their way of thinking, their point of view isn't actually the correct point of view, and they're actually right at the bottom of their journey, and they've got a lot to do to become anti-racist.
So the thing in question here on the screen is this is part of that safer, braver space bullshits. It's part of the Building Racial Literacy program, obviously, as well. But right at the bottom of the one designed for white people, whether that I would presume is probably like teachers and educators and whatnot, but the principle still remains the same in terms of like the ideology and the rest of it. But right at the bottom, and I know it might be a bit difficult to see, but the way that this is designed is that you make your way up the little ladder, okay? And then when you get all the way up to the top and you reach number 6, which is labeled autonomy, that's when you've become an active, successful anti-racist. Right down at the bottom, number 1, and that's where all the little naive children and all the newcomers to the program, that's where they will all be. As the woman said herself, number 1 says contact. And it says right at the bottom, and I know as I say, it's difficult to see, I don't see race. In my eyes, all my learners are equal. Okay? Now, you would think that's a commendable worldview to have, surely. But that's a problem. That's the incorrect way to view the world. Now, if you combine that with what the wee boy's saying, and he's saying that we're not born racist and whatnot, I would presume that wee boy's got the identical worldview to that off right at the bottom where it says, I don't see race. Okay? The colorblind society concept and whatnot, where people are just seen as equal, regardless of color and creeds. That used to be the default position. That used to be the sort of commendable position. Whether or not you agree with that is not the point. Okay? But that's incorrect. So then when you take that into consideration with what they punt out in these anti-racist school clubs, which in turn leads to clips such as the one of the wee boy talking about the need to learn about racism in order to ensure it doesn't rear its ugly head in the future, can't allow history to repeat itself and whatnot. You have to really call into question what's going on here. Because if the default position is for children and adults alike, for that matter, to just be quote unquote colorblind, not be racist, even as the woman said herself. That's the point. The woman said quite often when I introduce this to the people that I'm training, one of their first things that they'll say to me is, I'm not racist. That's not good enough. So then it makes me scratch my head. And I think to myself, if a wee boy doesn't think he's racist or a wee boy isn't racist, why do you need to introduce him to fucking racism? And then the penny drops. Because it's not the dictionary definition of racism that children are being taught about in these clubs. It's not the dictionary definition of racism that these up-and-coming teachers and wannabe anti-racist learners, etc., are being taught about. No, they're not. They're being taught about cultural racism, scientific racism, environmental racism, invert racism, overt racism, structural racism, critical race theory in and of itself, microaggressions, unconscious bias, right? Where everything is flipped on its fucking head and accusations or insinuations, I should say, are put forth that suggest that every single disparity in the country is down to racism, right? Then the revisionist history starts. We need to teach all the kids about slavery and whatnot from a very selective point of view. And the list is endless. All under the guise and all under the disguise of simply promoting tolerance and anti-racism. So that's really my point for this little video here. You know, it's just food for thought, maybe, for anybody out there. You know, maybe you might know somebody who's got a kid in school and they might be going through this crap, or it's in the pipeline. If you're in Glasgow, then there's a high probability that to some degree your child has been introduced to it, or somebody's child that you know has been introduced to it. Yeah, because Glasgow Council are fun. They've been doing this for a few years now. All schools up and down Glasgow have kind of agreed, at least in principle. But maybe it'd be if worth mentioning to them, you know, what's really going on here. Because as I say, it's all very well and good for somebody to go, well, my kid's just learning not to be a dickhead to brown people, right? And that's fine. But that's not what's going on here. And I think that the naivety of that wee boy could perhaps be extended as an excuse, perhaps, to adults who just might not necessarily think that there's anything untoward. But the reality of the matter is, there's a lot to be worried about here. Anyway, till next time, bye-bye.